I'm not pulling out of my driveway. We all know what that means. It's time for the Drive to Work Coronavirus Edition. So I've been bringing really fun interviews, and I have another fun one. It is Chris Pikula.
Hi.
Okay, so Chris, I'm going to start with the question I've been asking everybody, which is, How did you start playing Magic?
I started playing Magic when I went home for summer vacation after my freshman year of college. And one of my high school friends came home from like a weekend LARP, I think. And people at that event had introduced him to Magic. So he came home with a handful of revised cards that someone had given him and said, this game is pretty cool. People taught me how to play. We should buy some cards and play. So, me and 7 or 8 of my high school friends that summer started playing Magic with revised.
Okay, so this is like 94?
Yeah.
Okay, so how do you go from that to becoming a Pro Tour player? How did that transition happen?
Oh, wow. So that first summer, obviously, learning Magic, I don't know it's really hard to understand what it's like to learn to play Magic now, because there's just so many resources and so many ways to just learn about the game. And back then, obviously, there wasn't. So things took a while. But I think I won a tournament at the end of that first summer at like a local store or something. And then when I got back to Cornell, like a tiny local store tournament in 1984, pre-Pro Tour. I mean, this is then. And I could go on more into how I feel how I developed into getting good at Magic. If you want to talk about that, or if you want to talk about I went back to Cornell, and then instead of going to the role playing section of Cornell has a Friday night gaming club. That I don't know how long that had been going on before I got to Cornell. There's always been a Friday night gaming club there, as far as I know. Probably going back to the early 80s, at least. And, when I got back from that first summer vacation, I started going to the magic room instead of the role-playing room. And that's when I really started to learn about everything. At the end of that first summer, my friends and I still had not really figured out the difference between alpha and beta and revised. We were still kind of confused as to why some cards are rare and why we never got Moxes in packs. And I had to learn all that when I got back to Cornell from these people who had these binders full of all these old cards that I'd never seen. When I think about those days, what is so different about Magic now than Magic then is that rares are just kind of good now.
Mm-hmm.
They're either complicated or good.
Okay.
But back then, I was actually frequently confused because I would think something, but because a card was a rare,
mm-hmm.
but it seemed terrible to me, I would think I must be bad. I must be bad at the game because this card's rare, so it must be usable. So I must not really get it. But in fact, I was just often right. I just was kind of unwilling to accept the idea that I was smarter than the game, if that makes sense. And then
Sure.
there were cards that were kind of expensive that also confused me. I don't know if you remember, I'm sure you, it was hard to get Killer Bees. And I saw that card. I was why would anyone want this card? I don't understand. But it's hard to get. People were really trading for it. So it took a while to really understand the whole ecosystem. But then when tournaments started to get more organized, and I guess they rolled out. Did they roll out Type 2 just before the first Pro Tour?
Type 2 was the summer, I think, before the Pro Tour.
Right.
Pro Tour started in early 96, and summer of 95, I believe, was the introduction of They called it Type 2 at the time, but standard.
Right. So when Type 2 came out, standard, then there was Type 1 and Type 1.5 came in there somewhere, which is like legacy.
1.5 happened later, but yeah. It became extended, I think.
Right. So that's when it became more competitive, I think, is when we started to get like more serious about tournaments and such. And then, of course, Pro Tour 1 was literally just a friend of mine called and registered us. So then we were all just in the Pro Tour because one of us found out about it and made a phone call.
Yeah. So for people that don't know, PT1, there was a small list of people we invited. But other than that small list of people invited, you had to call on the phone to get in. That's how you got into PT1.
Yeah,
so what was PT1 like?
What was PT1 like?
Yeah.
PT1 was... so the coolest moment of Pro Tour 1, the one thing I remember, the thing that really hooked me on competitive Magic, so it was at the Puck Building in New York, which is now an REI. and there was like a big, like, sort of like... spectator room outside the tournament room, and there was a big screen where you could like watch the feature match, and of course that was all very new.
Yeah.
And I just very distinctly remember watching Dave Humphreys use his Sylvan Library on the big screen in his feature match.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, it was just so cool watching Dave Humphreys play. He was just like had Sylvan Library and Sinbad in his deck. And then somehow he still just got totally ruined because his opponent cast Autumn Willow before he cast his Autumn Willow, so he couldn't cast it because of the old legend rule. And I don't know, there was something that seemed so...
So he was playing Dennis Bentley, by the way.
Oh, is that who he was playing?
Yeah.
I did not realize that. So there was something so like intellectually just cool about watching Dave use his Sylvan Library on the big screen. And I just really, really struck me as just what I wanted to do. I wanted to like be involved in this like weird intellectual battle that could potentially be on the big screen for other people. And yeah, I really did get hooked. I mean, besides that, obviously by modern standards, the tournament had a lot of problems. The judges were extremely inexperienced.
It was the first Pro Tour.
Huh?
It was the first Pro Tour.
I know. I'm just saying, you know.
Yeah.
But by modern
they had judged every Pro Tour that existed up to that point.
Yes. By modern standards, yes, we would not be satisfied with the level of how much sloppiness was allowed from both the players and the judges. But it was a cool event for sure. No question.
So let's talk a little bit about early Magic, because one of the things that I like doing is using this as a chance to talk a little bit of history. And you and I go way back to early Magic history. What was the early Pro Tour like? I mean, I think that people think of modern sort of Pro Tour, and they don't realize that it was a different time.
Sure. I mean, one big difference is how young everyone was, for sure. I was 21 for Pro Tour 1.
Okay.
And I remember being thought of as like old. And there were a few people older, and even like a very tiny handful of people who were over 30. But it was really much younger than if you go to like a competitive event now. Like if you go to a Pro Tour now or Mythic Championship, or even to look at the top tables at, I guess I don't. I want to talk about Grand Prix, but I don't even know if they're this.
Well, I mean, we're in a pandemic. Normally people gather and play Magic.
Right.
This is a weird time.
Grand Prix 2 years ago and look at the top tables at the end. The average age is definitely over 25. And that just obviously wasn't the case. I think that was one because Magic was so new, so there just wasn't a group of people who've been playing since they were 12, obviously, because it just wasn't a thing. But also because because the game got so much bigger and the prizes got bigger, it just attracted a more an older crowd, I guess, a wider crowd. So yeah, people were definitely a lot younger, and that, of course, had both positives and negatives. I think the age. Obviously, I have a very big reputation for fighting against cheating in early Magic, and I do think that the age of the people involved in competitive Magic did play a very large part in how much cheating there was in Magic back then. Like it wasn't just that the judges weren't as good at looking for it, or that somehow the people running the tournaments were more permissive. I mean, those things were true to some extent, but it's just people who are young make bad decisions sometimes, and I think that really contributed to a lot of that. So that was a big part of it, just how young everyone was.
Yeah, you always had this quality about you that you felt like everybody could do better. Like, like people weren't doing, like, it could be better than it is. Come on, people, we could be better. That seemed a through line.
Yeah, but it's funny because even when, so every once in a while someone will show me like a Usenet post from me from like 1997.
Yeah.
And I'm very obviously young in these because I'm saying the things I'm saying have the same ideas I might use now.
Yeah.
I say them very differently.
Yes.
It was also, Magic was different back then because there wasn't this, there wasn't nearly as much sort of hive mind about what was good and what was bad. So people could take, today, there are players who sort of get credit for kind of maybe doing things a little bit differently. Like Sam Black is a recent, very successful player who I think has a reputation for, playing different decks than other people might. But back then, almost everybody in some sense kind of did their own thing. There wasn't nearly as much, homogenous sort of approach to the game where now today is like, most of the players just kind of like play the best deck. And then there's these kind of like, I don't want to use the word outcast. I don't know, right? They're not outcasts. They're just different who kind of do their own thing maybe more often than they should. Sometimes they're detriment, sometimes not. But back then, I feel like everyone sort of did their own thing more. It was just harder to know. I mean, of course, the structure of how the tournaments work, and what I mean by that is different because the timing is different. It used to be there was no real way to test for a Pro Tour except with your friends. There wasn't like a week of Magic Online before the Pro Tour or even and something like that where you could really play a lot. And because everyone was younger and the prizes were smaller, but mostly I would say because everyone was younger, so people just didn't have as much money, people weren't flying and living together for 2 weeks before a tournament either. So everything was just much less explored, and you were more likely to show up at a tournament and not really know how good your deck was, or be more surprised by what you saw. Obviously today people still show up at tournaments with bad decks, but I feel like probably the last 5 years especially, I feel like the Pro Tour decks have become quite a bit more predictable. Where back then you would often show up and someone would have a deck that really blew you away. You're like, we just didn't even know this was a deck.
So I'm going to segue into a tournament that talk about not knowing what was coming. I want to jump to PT Atlanta.
Okay.
So for those, let me set the stage. You know PT Atlanta, but let me set the stage for the audience. So PT Atlanta was the Pro Tour where we introduced the players to a set that wasn't out yet. It was Mirage, and it was a pre-release tournament Pro Tour. Like, you opened up the packs for the very first time. You've never seen anything you're seeing the cards for the very first time, and now you're playing a Pro Tour. So what was that like?
So one thing I want to say about this. So yes, you're playing a pre-release Pro Tour, which is obviously pretty nuts, especially because it's early in the days of Magic, where you know Wizards had not had. They hadn't really gone through this, like what they have, this modern idea of like building sets for limited didn't really exist. So,
Well, Mirage was the first set we built for limited.
Right.
Yeah.
So the other thing was, and this is related to that, is that I think a large number of the people in that tournament had never played in a sealed deck tournament before. Like, it wasn't just that it was pre-release. A lot of people just didn't play limited.
Yeah.
People just played, whatever their, I guess type 1 or whatever we were calling it, when you could just play with all your cards.
Yeah.
And type 2. So even sealed deck was pretty new to a lot of people. Obviously some people had played the Ice Age pre-release.
Mm-hmm.
And then I guess, was there a pre-release for...
Alliances had a pre-release that was held in like a couple cities.
Okay.
Including in LA at the boat, because it coincided with a PT on the boat.
Okay. Right. So there wasn't widespread sealed deck experience either. People weren't used to just going to the pre-release every 3 months and building sealed decks.
Yeah.
So it was very challenging, and I would say that it would be incredible to be able to go back and look at those decks, because the deck building mistakes. I mean, I made top 8, and I built my deck terribly. But my deck was just very good, so I could I just had bad mana essentially. Like if I drew my mana, my deck was going to be very good. I didn't need to build it the way I built it. That was just a terrible decision. But I mean, people made. I mean, I just remember Dave Price just made terrible decisions. And Brian Weissman, horrific. I just remember people who were considered to be very good Magic players, who were already like considered to be like top tier pros, were just totally just flummoxed by this, because new cards, new approach to the game. Like, there were just a lot of mistakes in deck building.
Was that your first top 8? Yeah, because Dallas was later. Dallas was the next.
Dallas was later, right?
Yeah,
yes,
Dallas was the next event. Okay. So that was your first top 8. And then the very next Pro Tour, right? Dallas was your next top 8, right?
Yes.
Back-to-back top 8s.
That's right.
So, because I remember, it's funny, when you first came on the scene, you were well known for being kind of an entertainer, that you could spin a yarn and stuff. But I think back-to-back top 8s finally said, oh, hey, Chris is a player now. This is, what was that like, sort of finally making top 8s? And
I don't think it felt quite like that, just because it's because they're only. I made my second top 8 at the 5th Pro Tour.
Yeah.
Right? So it's not like I was some. I mean, there've just only been 5 Pro Tours.
Sure.
And the first one, we obviously just kind of like showed up and didn't really realize what we were getting ourselves into. And, they didn't have as many rounds back then, so they felt a little more random.
Yeah.
And so it didn't feel that way to me. It definitely didn't feel like, oh, I finally made it, because maybe it's just sort of like the, trader gambler in me who wants to talk about small sample size or whatever.
Yeah.
But it didn't feel like anything had already been determined. I mean, I probably already knew that I was not as good as John Finkel at this point.
But who was as good as John Finkel at that point?
Right, exactly. It was very clear very early that we weren't as good as him. And we knew that we were playing catch up somewhat with the people who had just been kind of playing Magic 50% longer. I mean, playing Magic and thinking about it like competitively like quite a bit longer than us. So there just weren't that many years back then. So if someone had been playing 3 years and you've been playing 2, it felt like a lot.
Yeah.
But I don't think it felt. I mean, it felt good to do well, but I was used to just doing well at local tournaments and doing well at the tournaments that like Neutral Ground ran, or pre-neutral ground gray matter tournaments, whatever they're called, or whatever. So I was used to doing well in tournaments, and I think the Pro Tour was so new that I didn't feel like I had been stumbling on the Pro Tour. I mean, I got top. I did well at, I got top 32 at Pro Tour 1 and 3, I think.
Okay.
It was just so yeah. I mean, obviously it was great to do well, but I don't think it hit me. The top 8 didn't have the mystique it has now.
Okay. So let's flash forward about a year. So it is PT Tempest, and I tag you to do commentary for the first time. Do you remember this?
Just for the top 8, right?
I think it was. Well, I mean, we only did commentary of the top 8 in those days.
Right. Okay.
And Dave Price, so a good friend of yours would go on to win the tournament.
That's right.
And anyway, one of the things I had done back in the day was I would ask different pros to sort of do color, and I asked you to do color on the Tempest one. I think did you do it with Brian or was Brian later?
At that tournament?
Yeah. I don't remember.
At that tournament, it might have been Brian Hacker?
Maybe Hacker. But anyway, so I put you, for the very first time, I have you do commentary, and you did it really, really well. You were excellent in commentary. You've always been very entertaining, but you did a really good job. And then I started using you all the time doing commentary. So what was that? What was like doing commentary like back in the day?
I always really enjoyed commentary. I think that I got lucky where early in my career, you put me in a couple spots where I was really biased and people enjoyed that.
Yeah.
Like it was clear who I wanted to win. And I somehow, I managed to do that in a way that endeared me to people rather than made people not like me. Because obviously you could imagine a situation where being biased in the booth is going to turn people off.
Yeah.
Maybe the opponents in some cases may have worked in my favor as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I will say that I also, I compared to today for sure, I mean, I was just ahead of the curve in understanding Magic back then as well. And the longer I've been involved in Magic, and, I've done some sort of commentary lately, like with the Super Leagues that Randy Buehler ran, and I covered the Magic Online Championship when we did it online a couple years ago. So I still occasionally do commentary now, and I watch a lot of Magic coverage. And the one thing that I have realized now is being good at Magic and being on top of your game in many ways is still the most important thing to being good at commentary. And it's not because that's what people necessarily want from commentary, but because when you always understand what's happening, it just frees you up to be a better partner, be entertaining. When you don't have to think as hard about the Magic, where you can say intelligent things about the game as it's happening, and still have enough brain power left to be a good, sort of entertainer, or entertainer/journalist. I think that's just worth a lot. And I've just been constantly blown away by almost every really good Magic player. I've always like, wow, this person's way better at commentary than I would have expected them to be based on their personality.
Yeah.
And it's because they're just really good at Magic, and that makes the commentary. And obviously that, I'm sure I'm biased because that kind of like spiky player commentary appeals to my sensibilities. So as a consumer of Magic content, I'm sure I'm biased towards liking those kind of commentators. But I still think it's really important. And back then, I was just, I was one of the good Magic players back then, so I think that I probably stood out in the booth a little bit more.
Okay, I want to jump ahead, because before we run out, I definitely want to talk about Kuala Lumpur.
Okay.
So, so you had been to a couple So this is the Magic Invitational at Kuala Lumpur. You had been to a number of Magic Invitationals before that. You were a frequent. The fans used to vote you in all the time to go. And see if you remember this. I would used to tell you were invited, and then by the end of the Pro Tour, you had to tell me whether you were going or not. And for Kuala Lumpur, I went back to you and you said, I'm not going to go. I'm out. Do you remember this?
Really?
Yes. And I had to talk you into going. Do you remember this?
No.
Yeah, you're like, I've done it. I don't need to do it anymore. And I'm like, oh, come on, Chris. You enjoy it. And I had to talk you into saying yes, which I did, obviously.
Kuala Lumpur is so far.
Anyway,
really far away.
I got you to say yes, so you did say yes. So let's talk a little bit about Kuala Lumpur. So what happened in Kuala Lumpur? So this is, well, for people that don't know, the Invitational you won. So this is obviously...
Right. So obviously, like, it's the Invitational I won. I beat John Finkel in the finals, which...
Yeah.
Pretty big moment for me. Each of us had like a colossal misplay, which is interesting. Where
and real quick, so the audience doesn't know this, the finals in the Invitational is there were 5 formats, and you played each of the 5 formats. And one of the formats was Solomon. Solomon Draft, which you're not very good at.
Solomon Draft, I'm just terrible. I famously lost to you in it once, so famous to me. It's a famous event to me. So I'm really bad at Solomon Draft. So really, I had to win 3 out of 4.
Yeah.
Solomon Draft is also, like many people consider to be like the real skill testing format, which is why it's so embarrassing that I lost to you, and also why there was just no chance I could beat John. So really, I had to win 3 of the 4 other formats is how I viewed it.
Yeah.
And that is how it played out. Beating John in the finals of that is obviously amazing. But the big thing from that tournament, the other big thing besides me winning and Medley Mage, is that I showed up at that tournament and I was very unhappy with our decks. I was like, I don't like the decks we built. I don't think they're good. I don't know what I'm going to play. So I went to Dave Humphreys and I said, hey, are you guys willing to share technology? I mean, I'll be honest, I don't think our decks are great, which is why I'm coming to you. But what do you think? Like, do you want to share, like work together? And this is like the day before. And I don't know, I assume he proposed it, but because it doesn't sound like, I don't know who proposed it, but I know that he was like, whatever, it's not a pro tour, it's no big deal. But he said to me, I'll show you what I'm playing, but if you win this tournament, you have to fly me to wherever the tournament is next year, because there was always a Grand Prix.
Right, associated with it.
There was always a Grand Prix on site associated with the Invitational. So he said, okay, fine. You can see my decks, but if you win the tournament, you need to fly me to the Grand Prix where the Invitational is next year. And I was like, yeah, okay, fine. So that actually happened, and I had to fly Dave to Australia.
Right, it's in Sydney.
Not a cheap flight.
Yeah.
To Australia.
So, the thing I always remember about Kuala Lumpur, we were at some like amusement park or something. It was some half water park, half amusement park thing. Do you remember that?
I remember we went bowling.
Yeah. We went to the night market.
Remember the night market? I remember bowling. I don't remember the amusement park thing.
Well, I mean, the place we were staying at was some like resort.
Oh, right.
I mean, we didn't really go to it, but it was so.
Yes.
It was this big Kuala Lumpur resort that we had no idea what it was. So.
Yeah. Yeah, that was a cool trip. It's so long ago.
Yeah. So what's it like? Since we're almost out of time, I want to hear a little bit about winning the card. What is it like winning an Invitational card?
I mean, it's amazing. Having the card is amazing, especially because it's not what I submitted, but it's first of all, it's better than what I submitted, and which obviously makes it cooler.
Yeah.
They changed the card, but it's very, very much in the spirit of what I wanted, which is the most important thing.
Yeah, we worked with you.
Right,
yeah.
Right. You worked with me to get me something I would be happy with. I think that I happened to win the Invitational at a time where Magic design was changing a lot, so it was very difficult for me to like design a card that was, going to fit perfectly with the direction that you guys were taking Magic design.
Yeah.
So it made more sense for me, and in many ways it made more sense for me to give you the gist of what I wanted and for you to come up with the specifics, and it worked out amazing. It was really exactly, of course, now it's sort of underpowered by modern standards. I don't know if you saw the thing going around on Twitter about the card I submitted in 2002.
Oh, I did not, but...
which was a much... which was a much fancier design that ended up sort of like being ahead of the Magic design curve.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
I designed a 2/2 goblin that you could tap to reveal. You remove the top card of your library from the game, and if it was a goblin, a sorcery, or a mountain, you could play it. Which is basically like a red card now. That was like 18 years ago.
Yep.
But Meddling Mage, there wasn't really a card like it, so I wasn't sure exactly how to design it. I think I actually submitted a Spike-tail creature.
You sacked it to counter the creature. You named a card, and then you could sack it to counter the card that you named, I believe is what it was.
Right. Anyway, it worked out amazing because it was exactly really 100% in the spirit of what I wanted and a really powerful card. It's been a 4 of and 2 decks at one Pro Tour, or 3 decks. It's been a 4 of and 3 decks at one Pro Tour now.
Yeah.
And obviously no other invitational card has done that, so pretty happy.
Yeah, and one of the intent when I came up with the prize was to give somebody something that would mean a little more to them than just winning some cash at the tournament. That it sort of put you as part of Magic in a way that was just very different.
Oh, absolutely. It's incredible. I wish you still did it.
Well, we started the World Champions. We're starting to work with them on a card. So that we're kind of redoing it a little bit with the World Champions now. So
that's a great idea.
Yeah. So, but anyway, Chris, I realize I'm approaching my desk, so I'm almost to work. So, do you have any last thoughts before we wrap up today?
Thoughts? So
yeah.
People are always people whenever they interview me, they ask me last thoughts. I'm like, I did not prepare any closing remarks. I don't know. I hope Magic, post quarantine, we figure out how to make in-person Magic happen again and feel as exciting as it used to feel. I guess that's my only closing thought.
We will, but once we get some sort of the proper medicine we'll get there. Magic will return. So, but anyway, I'm at my desk, so we all know that means it's the end of my drive to work. So instead of talking Magic, it's time for me to be making Magic. So Chris, thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
And guys, I will see you next time. Bye-bye.